All right, we'll get started. The distractors can come in while I'm doing the very brief introduction. I'm very pleased to have Fabrice Durier here today to give a talk on the Karma project. So Fabrice got his undergraduate at Toulouse, and then his PhD in Nice. Then went to, I guess went to MPE.
Yeah.
And then UVic. And he's now transitioned between Arizona and back to Garching in the 80s.
That's correct.
Exactly, right. So he's going to tell us about an effort which is really interesting physically and very scary sociologically. He's trying to compare different models of feedback, different groups.
Thank you, Norm. And thank you for having me here. So yes, indeed, today I'm going to tell you about the Karma project. That's a project that started already 3.5 years ago when I joined Arif Baboul at the University of Victoria. It started small, and as always, it gets bigger and bigger. So we've got some grad students and technical support, and Romil and Norm have been joining us since then. But there is still quite some work to do, so what I'm going to present to you today is still a work in progress. So here is the outline of my talk. So first, I'll briefly review the status of galaxy formation as we know it. Then that will lead to the motivation for the Karma project and the setup of the experiment. And after that, I'll show you the first first result I have on the properties of galaxy populations. After that, I'll tell you a bit more about the cosmic flows we can infer from those simulations. And depending on the time, I'll present you the next step of the project. So here it is. In one slide, this is galaxy formation. And one of the things I like a lot about galaxy formation is that it involves so many different physical processes, and the interplay of scales is very large. So, for instance, the large-scale structure are going to be dominated by what the cosmology is telling us. Then the particle physics has an impact on what sort of evolution do we have. Then you have star formation, evolution, chemical enrichment, and feedback and black hole. All of this is going to play a very important part in the whole of galaxy formation. So, to put it in a few words, we think we understand that first you have to account for the gravitational forces that's going to be driving the large-scale structure. But on top of that, there is hydrodynamical processes that need to describe the primordial plasma of gas that follows the large-scale structure. And during the evolution of those scales, this gas is going to be compressed adiabatically in dark matter-dominated halo. And in that process, the gas gets heated up. Now, after this, you need to account for atomic processes that are going to be radiating away some of the internal energy of this gas, making it able to collapse down to the very bottom of the potential well of these dark matter halos. And given the conservation of angular momentum, some disk-like structure are going to form at the bottom of those wells. At the place where you have, inside of this clumpy disk, the very densest part of those disks, some clumps, some clouds. This is where you expect to form stars and more like stellar populations, like cluster population of stars. And then those populations, they're going to age and evolve. And during this process, there will be the production of metals and the release of this metal into the ISM via some regulatory mechanism that we like to call feedback. And so with all of this in mind, we can already realize that this is a highly coupled and nonlinear system of processes, and that all of this gives us a big picture on structures that go from dwarf galaxy to clusters of galaxy. And of course, the best way to understand that, the best tool we have are the cosmological simulations. So briefly, before I go on, how many of you are familiar with cosmological simulation? Is that something? So half of the room. So that's good, because one of the good points about this simulation that run very expensive, run on big computers, they make pretty pictures. And so any talk about cosmological simulation, you should have a movie of this. And the Illustris project is one of the the latest project, and is actually giving us a very nice overview of those processes I just described. So first of all, the formation of the large-scale structure. Here you see the dark matter distribution of halos, the collapse along filaments. So here you have the evolution in billion years. Next, you're going to see the distribution of the gas, color-coded by its temperature. So you see the dark matter halo are growing. And here comes the gas. So in blue, you're going to see the cold gas. Green is warm gas, and red, white is a hot gas. And you see some very large explosions like that are happening from the feedback processes I mentioned before. And so this is the evolution 4 billion years after Big Bang. You see those big cluster filaments of large-scale structure, and at the nodes of them, all these cold gas forming spiral-like structures where stars are born, live, and die, and explode in such a way. So you can go on for 30 billion years. But this is the general picture we have. Now, the next question we can ask is, I mean, this is pretty, but how realistic are those simulations? So now we like to compare the prediction of those experiments, numerical experiments, with some observational constraints, some data. So one of the first things you can do is to check how this simulation reproduce the star formation over time. So here I'm showing you the star formation density per unit volume as a function of redshift. So here is today. And so again, from the Illustris simulation, in black, this is the overall star formation against redshift. So there might be a little bit of disagreement at late time, but overall, those simulations are doing a pretty good job. You can also split this global star formation rate by the mass of the galaxy the star end up with. And so in red, you have the star that end up in the most massive galaxies, while in blue, those are the star that end up in dwarf systems. And something you can see that the most massive galaxies are going to form their star first, while the dwarf are forming stars on a much longer period of time, over a much longer period of time. And this is, I mean, not shown on this plot, but that's also something the observation have been telling us. So overall, these quantities we are doing pretty good on that. Now the next thing you want to do is to look at the statistic of your galaxy population, and what you plot is the mass function, which is basically a number count per unit volume and per unit mass. And for the longest time, that has been actually a quite difficult job to do for simulation like that. So here in dotted magenta, you've got a simulation that is a bit outdated. And as you can see, there is a very, in black dots are the observation here. In this simulation, there is a large overproduction of system of small mass, and also an overproduction of system with large mass. Overall, it's almost like a power law over a very large range. And that has been the status of the community for the last 10 years. Now, recently, over the past 2-3 years, these 3 projects, Eagle, Illustris, and Mufasa, recently, have been improving their modeling, and a lot of effort has been going into improving this first order relation, which is, again, the statistic of this galaxy. And as you can see, now we are reaching a very good agreement with this. So now the next question is, when you recover the number count of galaxy, the interesting question is to look at what the internal properties of this galaxy look like. So, maybe before going there, I forgot. Another way at looking at the statistics is to look at the efficiency of stellar formation. So this time it's against halo mass. I'm showing you the ratio of stellar mass over dark matter mass. And you see this gray line it's a halo. It's a technique to reproduce the observation. And so this is from a different collaboration, the Eagle collaboration. They have been able to recover this trend with a very big peak around 10 to the 12 and a sharp decrease on both sides. And again, I don't have the line for older simulation, but basically from that peak, previous generation of simulation were largely overproducing the amount of star form at small halo mass and as well the amount of star form at large halo mass. So with those modern simulation, we are actually doing a pretty good job at matching these observations. So as I was saying, now that we have the statistics approximately right, what about other properties? So dynamical, for instance, if you look at the sizes against stellar mass, this Eagle collaboration, they have been able to calibrate their simulation to match this sort of data in open square. The gray data points are constraints. Now, if you look at the maximum circular velocity, again, as a function of stellar mass, the agreement is remarkable. So when you look at that, you can also search for other property, like type of photometric properties. This is the specific star formation rate. So how efficient the star formation is as a function of stellar mass. Again, agreement is remarkable. The activity of star formation, so here I'm showing the passive fraction. So that's the fraction of galaxies that do not form stars. So this is low. The observations are telling us this is low at low mass and very high at the high mass end. So meaning most of the galaxies in this range are actually not forming stars. So this is what we call the quenching. There is no star formation in the most massive galaxies. And this simulation, again, the Eagle simulation, are recovering both the trend and the amplitude pretty well. The last example, type of properties we can look at are the chemical properties. So you can either look at the metallicity of the gas that is left in your galaxy on the left, or the stellar metallicity on the right, again, against stellar mass. And for both of these measurements, the agreement with the observation is pretty good. So now, in a few words, this is the status of the community. This field has been very active for the past 2 decades and growing very fast, made a lot of progress. Now we are reaching a stage where those big projects are able to match, as I just showed you, a very broad range of properties. So not only we form galaxies, but we form good-looking galaxies. So that's very encouraging. Now, there is a consensus. We are reaching a consensus about what sort of mechanisms are required to reach this agreement. And so I'm going to talk about that later. But basically, we all agree that it is very important that the galactic winds are driving the efficiency of star formation for the low mass end, while AGN activity is going to impact the high mass end of the properties. So an agreement on the mechanism, but there is still a very wide range of numerical codes and techniques to produce those experiments. And so the community is very diverse. So that's a point to keep in mind for later. Another point of interest is that when you look at the model of these various projects, most of these models, for the longest time, were all designed with different pictures in mind, different objectives or different motivations. For instance, 10 years ago, Volker Sprengel developed a multi-phase subgrid model that was supposed to address issues for the interstellar medium. Romil Dave, in 2008 and 10, improved the scaling of those galactic winds I've been telling you about using some work Norm did in 2005. And in his mind, at that time, he was mainly interested into explaining the chemical enrichment of the large scales. Another example is sometimes models are designed to address specific problems at specific scales. For instance, recently there have been an improvement of prescription doing developed to reproduce the explosion of super bubbles. And so, again, this is to address subgrid processes, but at a very specific scale. So this is the status of the simulations we see today. Now, this leads to the motivation behind my project. We're reaching some consensus, but all of these successes, what can we learn from them, and have we reached the final stage? And so one way of thinking about this is, are we actually capturing the important pieces of physics at play, as I said, winds, AGN, in a broad enough sense, and that the prescription, the methods I've been telling you about don't matter that much. So, for instance, we get the right amount of energy, and that's enough to reproduce most of the properties. So that could be one reason for the successes. Another one could be that there might be some level of degeneracy between the way we use our codes, we develop our codes, and the way we implement some of the pieces of the models. You can also have coupling between different pieces of the model, different subgrid pieces of the model. Or even worse, the whole pipeline might be bugged and lead us to this agreement we are seeing, the code, the model, the methods, everything is coupled, and we are doomed to succeed, maybe. So when you have this sort of question in mind, what you like to do to go a step further is to try to identify when we reach the convergence for this result, and when or if this convergence breaks down. And additionally, we could also look at across all the properties I showed you before, which of these results are more dependent on models than others. Those are the questions I am interested in looking at with the KARMA project. So this is a study of the convergence of methods and models, but a big part of all of this is also there is the issue about resolution convergence. This project doesn't address that yet. So now I'm going to give you 2 slides about a few technical details, but try not to bore you too much. Still, all of these simulations rely on hydrodynamic simulation. So you have different techniques. You can do particle-based, grid-based simulations. My code is based on a SPH particle-based technique. And so I improved a list of SPH was known to have some problem with surface tension and some mixing issues for the past, for the longest time. Over the past 5 years, a lot of improvement has been done. And so here is a list of improvement I've made to the code to ensure better mixing capabilities of the hydrodynamic solver. So if you have questions, we can talk about that later. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, an important piece of physics for the whole simulation is the radiative cooling and also stellar population evolution modeling. These 2 pieces, it seems that the community is pretty much converged on how we should handle that. There is still uncertainties, for instance, for the level, the yield, the chemical yield produced by the stellar population, so some factors. But the way most of these projects deal with these pieces of the model have pretty much converged. So these 2 things, I'm going to keep them constant across my study. Now, what I've done with the code is to use an approach that is plug and play, where I have designed many different modules that will reproduce one piece of the subgrid model at a time. And so the most important part are the way you treat the ISM and the star formation physics, as I mentioned before. So the community, there are 3 main ways of dealing with that. Either the multi-phase model that I mentioned earlier on. Some people prefer to use a fixed equation of state for your ISM. And then you use some scaling laws for the star formation. In a almost similar way, there are some studies that rely that describe the ISM with a criterion that is resolution dependent. So there are resolution issues that play in this part, but you can deal with that in a slightly different way. And then the star formation law can be linked to other quantities like the molecular content of your ISM, for instance. So these three options are available in the code, and I can switch from one to another as I want. Now the second, at least in my opinion, second important thing that's going to have an impact on your prediction is the way you deal with the enrichment strategy. So there are different ways of depositing the metal that have been produced by the star in the surrounding of the star population. Two main methods, some self-enrichment prescription versus some localized deposition strategy where you can choose the distribution function, top hat, kernel function, this sort of thing. So all of this is also available. Now the most important part is the way you deal with the feedback processes I mentioned before. Two main families. A lot of people have been using a wind model that has that use a decouple strategy. So you take some particles from your galaxies, and you make sure you send them away from the ISM in the hope that will regulate the local star formation. So this is you have many different ways of scaling these winds. So you can implement many variations. Some other teams have chosen different strategy when the feedback prescription relies on localized coupled strategies where you can either deposit momentum or thermal energy. So this is available as well. And the last point I want to make is, for now, the first step of the CAMA project doesn't include the AGN physics. So we know it's going to be important, especially at the large mass end of galaxy. But we are hoping to minimize the degeneracy by not using it. So the objectives for the project are to provide a fair comparison between the different models. And something I haven't mentioned so much before, but it's important to have a single numerical platform. Like there is still projects going on for code comparison, but as I mentioned earlier, between the degeneracy between codes and methods, no one really knows. So the idea was to have a single numerical code and then a set of models and check one against the other. So here is a list of the 6 most popular models in chronology in time. So with all the plugin I described in the previous picture, you can switch back and forth these pieces and try to reproduce as closely as possible the model that has been presented, developed, and published by these teams. So now when you have these 6 different models, what you do is you run your simulation. So my movies are not nearly as nice as the one I showed you before, so I just show you a projection. So that's a 25 megaparsec box at redshift 0. So this is today's projection of today's simulation, the end of the simulation, using a Planck cosmology. Here I see the gas density, the temperature of the gas, the metallicity, and this is the ratio of species. Mass resolution, that's somehow quite important. 10 to the 7 solar mass per resolution element. The spatial resolution is the order of the kiloparsec. And so I evolved my simulation from redshift around 100 to 0 to today, with an storing snapshot every 100 million years. So now I'm going to look at those properties I showed you earlier. So again, the first thing to do is to look at the star formation rate density as a function of redshift. At the bottom, it's the integrated quantity of that is actually the stellar density as a function of redshift. So as I said before, it's a volumetric average. So this is a generic quantity. As you can see from model to model, there is already some large variation. And something I'm not showing here, but you can trust me on that. The playing with the parameters that each other model has implemented in, you can vary a lot. Like one model can go quite far away on both sides, depending on the parameter you use. But in any case, we are always like in a reasonable agreement with the data. Low redshift, this is the place where the AGN physics that I don't include is going to play the bigger role. So the fact that I'm far away below redshift 1 is not so worrying because there is physics missing there. Now, you can already see very quickly that some models favor star formation at earlier time and will kind of level down later on, while some other model in blue would favor a star formation at much later times. So these are giving us some ideas how models can impact the star formation history. When you look at the bottom plot, the density, the stellar density in the simulation, you see there is a factor of 2 difference at the end. Again, AGN is playing its part, but the point I want to make clear at the bottom here is that this quantity, the stellar density, is directly related to the amount of metal that are produced during your simulations. So the more star you form, the more metal you produce, the more metal you disperse. The more metal you disperse, the higher the cooling. This is impacting the cooling time and the cooling rate of the gas. And the more star you're going to form. So there is a big cycle loop in there. And forming more stars is going to make you more metal. So that's important to keep in mind for later. Second thing, the statistic I was telling you about earlier. So this is the mass function I have here, and the stellar to LO mass ratio at the bottom. So again, above 10 to the 10.5, 10 to the 11, above the knee here, the fact that I'm, again, kind of a power law going straight down is because I don't include AGN. So basically, we're going to look at properties below 10 to the 11. Now, there is quite some level of disagreement. In black, you have a simulation without any type of feedback. And the other colored line are all the different 6 models. Now, as I said before, very sensitive to parameterization. And it's still challenging to reproduce both the knee, the break of the slopes, and the normalization. So this is actually quite far from what those other group have been publishing. So I'm currently trying to improve the agreement with the published result. And I think I didn't want to look too much into the resolution issues, but I think that has to play a big role, especially at the low mass end, 10 to the 9.5. So this is under investigation. In any case, we can already look at other properties. So here I'm showing you the assemblies of galaxies. So the age, the mean age of your galaxy as a function of stellar mass. So all of those are population average. So you see the mean of the distribution with the solid line, and the 1 sigma error with the error bar. So age at the top, and what I call the half-life of the galaxy, which is the time it took them to form the first half of their mass. So it's quantities that tell you how fast they form. And when you look at those, very large variation at low mass depending on the feedback prescription, this sort of thing. Sometimes the trends for the time, this half-life is opposite from one model to the other. Some models show interesting successes, but it's not the case for all of them. Yes?
What is the age of the galaxy?
So, good question. If you look at an object and you have a collection, an ensemble of stellar population, as I said, those populations, they age with time. Since their birth till the end of your simulation, you have your population, you can spot the age of that population. And so when you take the average age of all the population in a galaxy, that's what I call the age. So,
Even though it could have formed in another galaxy and then came in.
Very correct, yes. Yeah.
It's the oldest.
Yeah, that's true. So as of today, at the end of the simulation, this is my ensemble. That doesn't tell me how they form. That's a very good point. Okay, but still, we have an idea about the assembly, the timing of formation. Those photometric property I was telling you about, here is I'm showing you the amount of star-forming gas that is left in the galaxy. The top panel, the star formation rate in the middle panel, and that passive fraction we've seen before. So some level of agreement at large mass, but a lot of disagreement at low mass, and some models do way better for the passive fraction at the low mass than others. So we see there is degeneracy with models and methods here. The dynamic properties, they do a lot better. Like the circular velocity, there is a little bit of a factor of 2 maybe, but seems to be more converged. Radius, possibly resolution dependent, so I don't want to talk too much about this. And this is the concentration of your galaxy, how concentrated that is. The last result we can look at are the chemical properties. So there is a bit of a calibration issue here that I'm also solving right now. But as I said, the yields are uncertain with a factor of 2, so we can always work with that. But still, very large variation from model to model here and there. Again, it depends on the prescription for your metal deposition I mentioned earlier. And something I didn't say too much about, but there is some team that include a turbulent diffusion mixing mechanism for the metals, and that is going to have a very big plays an important part in the result on the metallicity. Okay, so this is my first conclusion of today. So far we've seen that the correlation of observation varies quite a lot from model to model and with different properties. It is very sensitive to parametrization and resolution. Some properties vary a lot from model to model, and it's easy to diverge in the predictions. So what I'm going to do next is what I'm actually doing now is to recalibrate the stellar mass function, try to match better what the result of those teams were, and then quantify better the error compared to the observations. And when that's done, you could look at other properties, for instance, at earlier redshift. Okay, so that comes to the second part of my talk. And here I'm going to introduce you the use of phase space diagrams. So here you see the log of the temperature on the left against the overdensity of the gas. So this is the thermodynamic state of the gas, all of the gas in a volume. So 0 is the mean density of the cosmic mean density. Here I'm going to split this phase space in several phases. So that straight line decides the star formation threshold. So above this, above. On the right of this line, you're going to see the star forming gas, so what I'm going to call the interstellar medium. This second vertical line tells you approximately the gas that is inside halos, dark matter halo, to the one that is outside of it. So you've got some that is colder. I'm not going to say cold because 10 to the 5 it's already quite hot, but this is called the cold fraction of the halo gas. So I'm going to call that the circumgalactic medium, the hot halo gas at the top. And on the left side of this line, this is going to be the diffuse medium, so the warm-hot intergalactic medium here and the diffuse medium here. So 5 gas phases plus a stellar phases, so 6 baryonic phases in total. So that one was the phase space was a projection of the amount of mass in any given phases. You can do many different projections. So here, for instance, I'm showing you color-coded the level of enrichment of that gas. Now, how much is enriched? In the bottom left, I'm showing you the level of metallicity of that gas, and here the alpha ratio that I mentioned earlier. so with Zoo's projection, you can already extract some very useful information. For instance, the baryon fraction, how much of the total baryon content is found in the stellar content, in the ISM phase, in each other phase. You can look at what the fraction, the level of enrichment of those phases, and the amount of metals, how much metals are in each of these phases. Here is the distribution. So for each of the 6 phases, I can look at the distribution of metallicity here. And I'm going to show you a little animation of that right now. So you see how with time this evolved, the distribution evolved. So the first thing to note is that none of those are simple Gaussian distributions. So trying to understand this a bit better, I'm going to keep in mind the median of the distribution and the extent of the wings. So movie, it's nice, but it's not easy to put on paper. So what you do is you try to plot this information against time. And so that's what I've done here for the galaxy phases. So for stars and ISM, I'm showing you the baryon fraction at the top, the enrichment level of this phase, so how much is enriched versus to what is pristine, and the metallicity level of these phases. So as you can see already, this follows pretty one-to-one the cosmic history I was showing you before. The enrichment level is you have a very remarkable convergence of different models, and the metallicity level as well. You can reach nice convergence here, both for the medians and also the distribution of the wings. For the ISM, this is going to depend significantly on the subgrid prescription you chose, as you can see here, more than a factor of 2. The enrichment is very dependent on the mixing processes. Oh, sorry. And the metallicity, you have a good level of agreement for the median, but the distribution can vary very widely. So the halo phases, briefly, you see that both the cold and hot phase, some models converge pretty well, but some other do not, and that has to do with your choice of the feedback prescription. So as I was saying before, the decoupled wind prescription tends to propagate more mass outside of the galaxy, so you end up with a bigger fraction in the halo. The enrichment level, again, very, very dependent on the mixing strategy, the deposition of the metals and the mixing strategy. And the metallicity is sort of all over the place. One thing I want to show, to keep in mind, for these two models, it looks like a very nice agreement about the median at redshift 0. But as you can see, this came from a very different path. So it's not enough to look at the result prediction as of today. You also have to think about the evolution of the system, and very different evolution here. Quickly, I'll show the diffuse phases, where you can have a factor of 2 difference in the hot diffuse medium. The cold fraction is mainly driven by the cosmology at earlier time, little bit by the feedback at later time. Enrichment, same thing, and the metallicity, there is no agreement whatsoever. So one conclusion I take from these quantities is that actually the enrichment history is a very nice measurement, and in order to distinguish from model to model the prediction. So that's what I liked about the metallicity. Now, what I've shown you was the evolution of the phase properties with time, but it was a sort of a static approach. Here I'm going to use a particle tracking analysis, sort of analysis, where from snapshot to snapshot, I'm going to study how particles move from one phase to another. So I'm going to redefine the phases again. Both ISM gas and star that are bound to structures are going to be galaxies. I didn't mention that earlier, but we have a structure finder that can tell us what are the bounded structures. So we have galaxy structures and halo structure. So for this quantity, I want them to be bounded to the galaxy. in this case, I'm gonna the CGM gas we had before that is bound to the halo, but not to the galaxy. It's going to be the cold halo, the hot halo for the same reason. And the gas that is hot and outside of everything is going to be the hot diffuse and the cold diffuse. Now, with that in mind, you can define flows. So anything that's going to flow between two times from the outside in, from the hot part, it's going to be a hot accretion mode. We're going to have a cold accretion mode flowing inwards from the cold to the inside the halo. Some cooling is going to happen from the hot to the cold phase. Galactic accretion is going to follow from particle flowing into the galaxy. And those feedback mechanisms I was telling you about, the galactic outflows, bringing gas from galaxy to the halo, or even halo outflows, like could also go straight to the IGM. So these are the definition of my flows. And so again, you can look at the amount of mass that flows from one phase to another, the enrichment of these flows, and the level of metallicity. I won't go into the detail of all of this, but some things are more a function of cosmology. The large scale flows are cosmology dependent. Little bit of variation from the feedback prescription. Enrichment level again is very impacted by the diffusion. The galaxy flows, so the same thing. You can look at the accretion onto the galaxy versus the depletion. This is basically either you've been forming stars or you can throw matter out of the galaxy. You see a nice relationship between the star formation and the outflow. So that's sort of a mass loading you can see from there. And for the rest, there is the recycling that's happening here. So here comes the second conclusion of my talk. I hope I convince you that phase-space diagrams are very useful to learn about our system. The baryon fraction is quite sensitive to the feedback recipe, but the enrichment history is actually the thing that is the most helpful at distinguishing between models. Now, what's next? I've been very qualitative so far, so I'm going to try to quantify these trends against the different models. What's making them? What makes the trend happen that way? And the second thing I'm going to do next is to do this sort of analysis, but as a function of halo mass. So I want to know about these flows, the in and out of flows, as a function of halos and environment. How how the model impact these sort of predictions. So how long do we have in total? 10 more minutes? Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit more about what's missing in the Karma project, which is the AGN part. And the reason we took it out, it's because it's quite difficult. There are many things that impact the whole AGN. So the first of all, you need to figure out how to seed the black hole. So again, the resolution is not good enough to describe that from first principle, but you have to find a way to seed these black holes. Now you also need to decide how you're going to merge them, because sometimes the merging of galaxies are going to bring two together, and so you need prescription for that. The biggest pieces are the last two, deciding on what the accretion onto black hole, how can you constrain this, or what law are in play, and the feedback effect from supermassive black hole. Usually people have identified two main modes: a quasar mode that is heating the locally around the black hole, and radio mode when you see big cavities in the large scales. So each of those steps are going to have some consequences on the outcome of your simulation. So the question that we're going to be asking are are we doing it right so far? So sometimes you use simple laws, but sometimes also simplistic laws. So maybe you want to make sure you're not going too simple. Is the right amount of energy involved? And what part needs to be improved? So feeding and eating or feedbacking would be my take, the most important part. In terms of feedback, as always, for most of things, the question is, do we do the thing at the right time and the right place? This is very important. So for this second step of the project, we're going to reverse the strategy. Learning from our mistakes, we did too many plugs and plays at first. So this time, we're going to select selection of models that were robust from this first step of the project. And from there, we're going to plug one AGN model, the one that people agree that are the most promising. And then we're going to switch one thing at a time from the list I just showed you before, trying to measure the impact of these pieces, the AGN pieces, on the outcome. So I'm going to introduce you the Mufasa simulation. So I showed you a plot earlier that it's an effort led by Romil Dave at University of Cape Town with Phil Hopkins, myself, Daniel, and Mika. So for these simulations, we are trying to improve the black hole prescription. So I was telling you about the seeding mechanism earlier on. Can we constrain them? Not really. The resolution is way too bad to talk anything about seeding. The only thing maybe in the near future we could do is to infer a halo occupation density. Like there are people working on the progenitor of these seeds, and they are able to tell us, are we going to expect one black hole seed per halo, or maybe fewer, not every halo. So maybe we can work a little bit on that, but the resolution is not going to be near what we need in the near future. Are we able to grow supermassive black hole fast enough? Clearly, it's not easy. To produce the very most massive black hole, 10 to a billion solar mass at redshift 6, 7, 8, you probably need super Eddington growth for some time, given the time there is. Now, a lot of people have been talking about self-regulation. Do the accretion and the feedback are working in such a way that the black hole self-regulates itself? This has been the main assumption for the past 10 years. Now, we are kind of questioning that assumption. And so, with the work of Daniel Angles-Alcazar, following the simulation of Phil Hopkins a few years back, that was a set of multi-scale simulations. So far, most people have used a Bondi sort of accretion prescription for growing the black holes. And when you use this sort of prescription, the accretion rate on the black hole is highly dependent on the black hole mass itself. Now, the work of Daniel, you can parameterize the accretion law according to those simulations I mentioned, as a function of the amount of gas that's available at the galactic scales. And when you do that, here I'm showing you one of his results where he's showing the accretion rate as a function of what would be the accretion rate to stay on the scaling relation. So for black hole, supermassive black hole, you have some relationship between the black hole mass and the host halo mass. And so to stay on this scaling relation, what would be the accretion rate you need to do that? If you use an accretion law in such a way, the rate of the accretion rate is going to be always far off what needs to be done to stick on the scaling relation. And this is why people have been claiming you need self-regulation to end up on the scaling relation. So basically, at low, for small black hole, you need a very fast accretion, but not too much feedback. Then you're going to need a lot of feedback to regulate and go back on the scaling relationship. Now, with a torque-limited model developed by Daniel, as it happens, you always follow the scaling relationship. So This comes because of the dependency on the black hole mass, basically. This is so small here compared to there that you always end up on the scaling relationship. And that is quite nice to be able to decouple accretion to feedback. The one parameter that's left to be played with is a sort of retention rate, the epsilon. And so here I'm showing you the black hole mass as a function of the stellar content. And as I said, in yellow, I don't know if you see it very well, here is the observation with 1 sigma scatter. And basically, Daniel's model is able to reproduce the slope naturally. Now, you're left with the scaling of epsilon. That's a free parameter. And this allows you to scale up and down the relationship. So this is an improvement, I think, from the earlier simulations. And so this is what we are having in our Mufasa project now. Now, the second part, AGN feedback. So what's at stake? As I was saying, doing it right, sometimes you get the right result for the wrong reason. And my belief is that for the past 10 years, a lot have been done, but the feedback prescriptions are not really realistic. And people claim they all produce some relationship, but if you really look into the detail, the prescription is not realistic it cannot look like that. Coupling so as I was saying, coupling the feedback at the right time, yeah, suspicious use of bombs or reservoirs sometimes. The right place, it's going to be linked to your resolution, the ability what you can do with your simulation. But it's not obvious how to deal with small-scale energetic versus large-scale energetic. So yes, clearly there is room for improvement, and the idea would be maybe to get a better idea from the observations. So the two modes I was telling you about before, so far people have used a lot about the quasar mode feedback, where they use thermal blast with an energy of 10 to the 8 or 10 to the 9 Kelvin. And the energy is deposited very, very close to the black hole. And that has big consequences on the properties of your galaxy, because with such an energy deposition, all the gas that was left in your galaxy is going to go wild. Radio mode, some people have tried to use thermal bubbles off center from the galaxy. Other teams have used collimated jet-like injection. This is promising, but highly resolution dependent. Trying to fit a jet into a poor resolution simulation, it's not going to be very stable. Most people have done nothing, so that's better. So what we could do, and that's what Daniel has been working on, is to try to model the quasar mode with some nuclear wind. And he has some prescription on that. And so I don't know if you want the detail about this, but he's been working on implementing a wind feedback for the nuclear wind. That depends at the end on the momentum input and the velocity of your feedback prescription. Here I'm showing you the same relationship with black hole mass against stellar mass with 4 different types of feedback, no feedback at all. And then you can play with the velocity or the momentum input. And the nice thing about this is, as I said before, accretion and feedback are now mostly decoupled. And so it's still able to recover this scaling relationship. Maybe you could argue there is a little tilt at the high mass end, fine. But mostly the agreement is still pretty good. So that's for the quasar mode. Now for the maintenance mode, the radio mode, what we call quenching, we're going to need to have the energy in the hot halo. And the idea would be to try to link this maintenance mode to the AGN activity. So last slide. Romil has worked with a student of his trying to implement this quenching feedback. So first he implemented a very simple toy model where you use a sharp transition on halo mass, whole halo above 10 to the 12 solar mass, are going to have their hot gas kept hot. So you prevent the cooling to happen. And when you do that, you actually see the quenching happening. So the work I'm going to do with Romil, so this is the idea, to keep the halo hot like that. Now we're going to try to link his original model to the black hole activity. And that's it for today. Thank you.
Time for one or two quick questions.
I just have GLS questions. But, so the question is, where is the cold diffused gas? In what region? That's what she asked me to ask.
So this is what you have in the filaments that tunnels through the hot medium. So first it's outside of the halo, but you've seen in the movie there is this structure that tunnels through. So this is where the cold gas lies.